Hi, I'm Paul Gibson, co-founder of Retake Our Democracy.
And I'm Roxanne Barber, the other co-founder of Retake Our Democracy. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, welcome to our panel discussion focused on the New Mexico state budget crisis and what we can do to avoid drastic cuts in our social services and education. We hope that through this Zoominar, we're better able to advocate during the special session that's starting June 18th and also in the 2020 legislative session. 2021, thank you. We want our legislators and their constituents to view the budget as a moral document with decisions having ethical and moral implications that impact all New Mexicans. Our panelists tonight are three members of New Mexico Voices for Children Leadership, Amber Wallin, the Deputy Director, and Bill Jordan, the Government Relations Officer, and Paige Knight, the Research and Policy Analyst. And joining them will be Chair of the New Mexico State House of Representatives, Representative Javier Martinez. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we are on stolen Tewa land, and we want to thank the Tewa people for their centuries of stewardship of this land. And I also want to send out our hopes that the Navajo and Hopi nations are able to turn back this COVID assault that they're enduring as soon as possible. And I also want to send out hopes to all of you that you're staying healthy, you're staying hopeful, and you're staying home. So it's a interesting time we're living in. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know that in the chat bar, you'll find a link that will take you to information about our future Zoominars, and also to where you can view past Zoominars. This one will be up there tomorrow. We've had Zooms with the Land Commissioner, the PRC Commission candidates, Dar Jamail and Greg Rogers, Common Cause, and now this one tonight. We have future ones on public banking in New Mexico, the Health Security Act, the PRC, and the Energy Transition Act. And you have to pre-register for all of those Zooms. So please just take a look at the link in the chat bar, and you can use that to get more information. You'll also find a link that will take you to our endorsements for the June primary. We'll put that up at the end of the conversation because we don't want to disrupt things anything more. But if you just go to retakeourdemocracy.org and hover over the actions and events, the elections menu, you'll see our endorsements. Roxanne, can you give everybody like kind of a brief outline of how we use the Zoom for the people who don't know?
Sure, I'll try to go through this quickly. First of all, I just want to welcome everyone onto the call. We're here in our dining room in Santa Fe, and we've got people that are Zooming in from Las Cruces and Silver City and Truth to Consequences and Albuquerque, Farmington, Taos, and of course Santa Fe. So welcome everyone. We're happy that you're with us tonight. So we're using the Zoom webinar format, which means we're not going to do hand raising and we're not going to take questions via the chat. You can use the chat, and that's for those of you who are new to Zoom. You can find these functions. They're at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see them, just hover your cursor down there and you'll find them. So if you want to make a comment or ask a question to an individual attendee, if you know someone else is attending, you can go ahead and comment in there. Or if somebody else has a question,
and that's private.
Well, you can send it to all panelists and attendees. That way, everyone see it. Or you can choose names, but I think you can only choose. I guess you can. Looks like maybe you can choose anyone who's on the call. And if you're having any technical problems, you can use the chat to pose a question, and I'll see if I can help you. But for the actual questions to the panelists, we're going to use Q&A. That's also in your bottom toolbar. And so as soon as you have a question, go ahead and type it in there, and then we're going to get to those in the last 30 minutes of the program. We have some predetermined questions that we're going to be asking the panelists for the first hour, a little under an hour. So use that Q&A function if you have a question. And please don't use the raise your hand function because we're not going to be calling on you. And oh, and just one more thing. If you want to see all the panelists at the same time, up in the right-hand corner of the black screen where all the panels are, the videos are of the panelists, there's an option to choose speaker view or gallery view. If you click on gallery view, you'll see all 5 screens. And I think that's about it.
Okay, so before we begin our questions, I want to put this whole discussion in context. The revenue from, oh my goodness, I have the old questions. I'll put it in context myself, or the old intro. Basically, we had, for years, been suffering from revenue cuts, tax cuts, and failure to actually extract the royalties we could have from gas and oil. We've known all along that the gas and oil industry was a boom or bust cycle, and we've endured some of those booms and some of those busts. And but the combined impact of having the price of oil plummet to, well, it was negative. It was below zero not so long ago. It's come back to $34 a barrel. But that's still $25 a barrel less than when the last legislative session began. So it's a big hit, and that's a big hit to our revenue. And if you add to this the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on local business, local employment, that further reduces state revenue. And in this context, we have a special legislative session focused on the budget crisis to begin on June 18th. Tonight, we will wrestle with all of these issues with some folks who have long been pretty close to the budget process. So let's get started and welcome our panelists and attendees. And how about if each of you take about a minute to introduce yourselves and maybe let people know, oh,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, we were saying who's going to ask which questions, and that's already fallen apart. But I don't need to repeat it. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Take about a minute to say who you are, what you do with voices, and if you want to say a little bit about your background, feel free to do that too.
Paige, why don't you go?
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Paul and Roxanne, for having us. My name is Paige Knight, and I'm a research and policy analyst at New Mexico Voices. I focus primarily on tax and budget policy with Voices. So a little bit about how I got to Voices. I've always been interested in nonprofit work. After graduating college, I worked for a variety of nonprofits, doing mainly direct service. I really enjoyed it, but it kept kind of dawning on me that a lot of the services we were providing were really just Band-Aids. Necessary at the time being, but really weren't getting at the root cause of why these individuals needed our services. So more and more, I was just realizing the importance of public policy, and that's really key to being able to change those structural issues. So I actually went to grad school at University of New Mexico for a master in public policy degree. I was pretty new to New Mexico at the time, but when working on school projects, I just kept coming across all this great data and reports from New Mexico Voices for Children. I actually attended one of their conferences up in Española and was just completely captivated. And little did I know at the time that in a few months I would be hired on as an analyst with them. So I've been there for just under 2 years now and feel just very fortunate to be working with such a great group of people.
You are.
Thank you. You want to go next?
Bill?
Oh,
Sure.
he's unmuting.
Hi. Thanks, Paul and Roxanne. Let me first say, if I might, that from all of us at Voices, our hearts go out to all of those families on the call who have lost loved ones during this pandemic. It's big enough now that I think all of us have some familiarity with folks, friends or neighbors, or at least those who've struggled financially or lost jobs. And we're going to get through this. And I just want to thank all of you for everything that you're doing and for doing your part to keep New Mexico safe. I'm Bill Jordan. I'm the Policy Advisor and Government Relations Officer with Voices. I'm basically the lobbyist and work on policy development throughout the year. I've been with Voices for almost 22 years. And like Paige, I really consider it a privilege to work with such a great team of experts who bring not just a lot of expertise and credibility to their work, but also a lot of heart. When I first started going to the legislature over 20 years ago, I would ask for funding for kids, education, healthcare, all the things that would help kids and families succeed. And lawmakers would often say to me, well, where do you expect us to get the money? And so it was pretty early on, almost 20 years ago, that we realized, or I should say Kay Monaco, our executive director, realized at that time that we needed to become the experts in where to get the money. And so a lot of people find it strange that Voices does so much tax and budget work, but there's a reason for that. Yeah. And you can't provide the kind of support that kids and families need without adequate revenue, and doing it in a way that's fair. So Kay, if you're on the call, thank you. And thanks to everybody who has been supportive of our work over the years.
Okay, Amber.
Thanks again for having us here this evening. I think for us Voices crew and for Representative Martinez, we like to talk fiscal policy. It's heartening to find that 100 other people want to talk about it on a Tuesday evening with us too. So to answer your question, I was born and raised in New Mexico. My mom's from Cuba. My dad's from Carrizozo. I graduated from Moriarty High School. I was also a Las Cruces Aggie and a UNM Lobos. So just really tied to the state. My mom was a single mom and a public school teacher. And so I've really seen firsthand the challenges that working families and teachers and children face in our state. And I've seen how public policies can hold them back. And I've also seen how public policy can lift them up. You know, as a child and as a teen and as a college student, I was a recipient of a lot of public policy, of benefits from a lot of public policy. And so I've always kind of had that drive and that tie to the community and to do policy work. I worked at the state and the federal and the local level in government, but you know, I love politics. I missed the advocacy aspect. And so 8 years ago, I met Bill and Jerry Bradley, who is our former research director, and I see that he's attending as well. And I met them, and it was just kind of sold, you know, and the Voices team and all of our great partners and the great legislative champions that we get to work with continue, you know, pulling me in every day. So thanks again for having us, for doing the work you all do.
Thank you. Thank you. And Representative Martinez.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you, Paul and Roxanne, for organizing this this webinar. And it's good to see my friends from Voices. Although I see them several times a week on these Zoom calls, a lot of work that we do together. But my name is Javier Martinez, and I'm a state representative. I represent the downtown and North Valley areas of Albuquerque. I am the co-chair of the House Taxation and Revenue Committee. I was elected in 2014. And now I'm entering my third or fourth election. I lost track, but here we are. I'm originally from the El Paso, Juarez area. My parents migrated here when I was 8. We moved into the International District, into the La Mesa neighborhood, where I grew up, attended school from elementary all the way through high school. Attended UNM here, graduated from the law school in 2010. I work as an organizer. I run an organization called Partnership for Community Action, which is actually how I know a lot of the folks at Voices. In fact, little known fact, Voices was a fiscal agent for Partnership for Community Action for a while. So that's how I met Bill. I don't even know if he remembers, but I met him probably close to 20 years ago in that space. And now we get to do a lot of good work together. So thank you for having me. Looking forward to the discussion. I do want to elevate a couple of my colleagues here on this call. I noticed that Representative Christine Chandler's on the call, and Representative Thompson, and Representative Harry Garcia is on the call. There may be a couple others on there. I do want to make a special mention of Representative Garcia. On Friday morning, I got a call from Costco saying, we've got 2 pallets of water for the Navajo Nation. Can you find a truck to get them there? And it's hard to find a truck to carry 2 pallets all the way to that part of the state. I texted Representative Garcia, and within 2 hours, he was here with his wife picking up water to take back to his community. So, I mean, just the kind of guy he is, looking out for his neighbors. So, thank you, and good to see you, Rep. Garcia.
Okay, so
Thank you.
let's move on to some of the substantive issues we've got to deal with. Let's start by putting our current budget crisis into context. How did we begin to drain our revenue resources, and how did we get here? And then, like, what historic opportunities did we, to diversify our funding base and increase our revenue levels? What did we miss and why? And Amber, you're going to take this question, and then when you want that slide to come up, just let us know.
Okay, great. And I think that historical perspective is a good one to take when we talk about these issues. And so I think that's a great question. And I'd start off by saying that, really up until these past 2 legislative sessions, not all, but most of our tax policy over the preceding, we'll say 15 years and 3 gubernatorial administrations has really kind of represented a failed strategy of trying to cut our way to prosperity. So go back to 2003 under the Richardson administration, and we gave away a massive personal income tax cut to the tune of over $500 million a year every year. And that went pretty overwhelmingly to only the wealthiest earners in the state. Now, fast forward to 2013, and in the last moments of the legislative session, we gave a major corporate income tax cut that costs hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And again, the benefits of that go overwhelmingly to big multi-state corporations. So that's a lot of revenue we lost out on. Now, over the years, we've also given kind of carve out after carve out of our state sales tax, the gross receipts tax, to various industries, various businesses, various causes. And so essentially we've given away hundreds of millions in tax cuts over the years, 61 tax cuts under Governor Martinez alone. And it was all with the promise of jobs. We cut taxes, millionaires will flock here, businesses will flock to relocate here. But of course, that's not what we saw happen. And you could pull up that slide there that you all wanted us to show. So not only did that kind of economic boom not happen as a result of those tax cuts, those economic benefits did not trickle down, but the results that we saw were negative on in a number of different ways. And so one of the ways that it really harmed the state was that our tax system was made more regressive. So it was made less fair for regular working families in our state. And so you can see what that slide basically shows you. You can kind of look just at those dark blue bars. That shows that New Mexicans with the lowest incomes in our state pay some of the highest rates in state and local taxes. So these are things like our sales tax, our gross receipts tax, our income taxes, our property taxes. And you can see that at the lowest end, so earners in New Mexico making less than $17,000 a year, that they pay over 10% of their incomes in state and local taxes, while those at the very high end, the top earners, pay less than 6% of their incomes in state and local taxes. So that's just a way to show what all of those tax cuts have done. When you give away tax cuts overwhelmingly to really high earners and not to low income folks and middle income folks in our state, you get a really regressive tax system. Now, another thing that all those tax cuts did for our state, and you guys could take that down whenever you're ready, but as we gave away our revenue in personal income taxes and in corporate income taxes, our revenue sources really narrowed. So we really cut down on 2 big chunks of our revenue streams, and so we became really increasingly, and we would say reliant on the volatile oil and gas industry. That became a huge proportion of our state revenues. But as oil and gas industry goes down, so too do our state revenues. And maybe most important from Voice's perspective, as we gave away money, we then had less of it available to fund really critical things like education, healthcare, public safety, behavioral health, work supports like childcare assistance. And so we had not the same amounts of funding to devote to those programs. And then under especially the previous administration, we were led by policymakers who are unwilling to raise revenue for those services that children and families and workers, and really that our economy depended on to thrive and to be strong. And so while the benefits of those giveaways went overwhelmingly to the most wealthy and well-connected and the biggest corporations, the real results, the results felt by New Mexico families, is that we just didn't have the money to fund crucial programs. You know, we cut K-12 education to a point where we're just recovering to where we were in 2008, slashed higher ed. We underfunded health programs, and that austerity really had serious implications for families and for kids as we dropped to near bottom in the nation in hunger and in poverty and in education. And while we made some big gains in 2019 and 2020, you know, we were just starting to claw our way back, just starting to get ourselves on a road to a stronger New Mexico when this crisis hit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amber. Oh, wait. Oh, no, we're not. It's telling me we're muted, but we're not. Okay, so this next question is for Paige. Can you tell everyone here tonight just how large is the deficit projected to be this year and the following year, and, you know, as far as we can foresee?
Big.
Yes, yes. So the state released updated revenue estimates a few weeks ago for the next couple fiscal years. So as we all know, and like Paul mentioned, with COVID-19, business closures and layoffs mean significant declines in income and sales tax revenues. And then combined with low oil prices and declining production means we're anticipating pretty substantial budget holes for the next couple of fiscal years. So I have a table, if you guys want to go ahead and share that. That shows that what those projected shortfalls are from where revenues were originally forecasted at. Let's see here. Perfect. So the first line shows the pre-COVID revenue estimates that were made at the beginning of this year. And so we were estimating revenues of about 7.8 billion to 8 billion by FY22. And then just a reminder that our budget for FY21 is about 7.6 billion. So the next lines are those updated estimates. They show two different scenarios that state estimators looked at, a U-shaped scenario and an L-shaped scenario. So in the U-shaped scenario, revenues contract in FY21 and then began a modest recovery in FY22. So shortfalls of around 1.7 billion than previously forecasted, which you can see in red for these coming fiscal years. So in the L-shaped scenario, there is a more prolonged and deeper economic contraction, with revenues possibly declining more around 2.4 billion to 2.5 billion. So these two estimates obviously depend on a variety of factors, such as how the virus progresses, how economies reopen, how quickly consumer confidence rebounds, business closures, how temporary layoffs are, and of course, oil supply and demand. So ultimately, we know we're going to have some pretty big holes in our revenues, which of course impacts our budget, but we at Voices have a few ideas and recommendations, which we'll cover here tonight, of how to address those gaps so that we can continue to support New Mexicans with those essential programs and services that can keep us moving forward during these unprecedented times.
So we have, and whose estimates, where did these estimates come from? Someone's asking in the chat.
Yep, so it's the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. It's economists from the DFA, the LFC, TRD, that get together and put out these revenue estimates. They typically only do it about 3 times a year, but due to these circumstances, we needed some more recent revenue estimates. So it comes from the state.
Okay. Next question's for you, Bill. We're going to go over a lot of different options that we have to attack this problem without making big cuts in education, health, and human services. Let's start with this one. How much federal funding is approved and is on its way as by way of relief to the state? And what do you see in your crystal ball coming possibly in the future?
Thanks, Paul. Well, there's a good bit of money that's already on its way and hopefully a lot more. But let me just start with a statement that I hope we will all remember as we go through this over the coming months, and I hope not years, but maybe. And that is, New Mexico's got a revenue problem, not a budget problem. You're going to read in the media and hear all the time that we've got a budget problem. The problem is not the budget. The problem is we don't have the revenue to meet the budget, and the budget is equal to the needs that we have. So if you begin with that, if you begin with the necessities of the budget itself and what it funds, then you begin with a perspective that we need to find revenue to pay the bills, as opposed to we need to give up some of our kids' education or health care or public safety. So that is very basic. So let's assume that we're 400 million, just to simplify it, let's assume we're 400 million short in the current fiscal year that ends at the end of June, and another $2 billion short in the next year that starts on July 1st. So Congress has already passed 4 pieces of legislation that sent funding to the states. And New Mexico has already received about 200 million for education, 250 million for Medicaid, and just over $1 billion in COVID relief efforts. Some of that $1 billion will help with the current budget, but right now, a lot of it cannot be used to backfill the state's budget. I hope and I believe that that will change over the coming weeks, because there's a lot of bipartisan pressure on the administration to lift the restrictions on how the money can be spent. The House in Congress just recently passed a new $3 trillion aid package called the HEROES Act, which would provide over $1 billion to New Mexico. The Senate is not likely to pass that. They will probably pass something. And Mitch McConnell said today that they would, but not in the amount of $3 trillion. The point here is that New Mexico needs over $2 billion to meet its budget, and we have several ways to get there. No doubt that in a few weeks, when the legislature meets in special session, they're going to need to adjust the budget. There's probably some places where we've actually saved a few dollars because of the shutdown. But let's hope that those budget adjustments are very few. There's $1 billion or more that the state has in federal aid, and more on the way. And we have $2 billion in reserves, as Paige mentioned. So, and you may have seen in today's Albuquerque Journal that there's a lot of unspent capital outlay funding that could also be clawed back. So the bottom line is you got $1 billion or more from the feds, you got $2 billion in reserves, you've got hundreds of millions, if not more, in capital outlay that is available if need be. And that'll allow us to remake the budget for next year without damaging cuts. Let me just say one more thing. Mitch McConnell said today that there's going to be a 5th federal relief bill and that it'll pass in the next month or so. Our goal for the special session should be just to get us to January, when we can make other adjustments halfway through the year. We don't have to fix all the state's problems on June 18th. We just need to buy ourselves some time and see what else is coming from Congress. Do oil prices come back? Does the economy rebound or get worse? Then we'll have new revenue estimates in January and a better sense of what the rapidly changing fiscal situation really is. We'll also have a new Congress and perhaps a new president, all of which I hope will provide a better economic outlook than we are seeing now. If we make deep cuts now, it's going to be really hard to restore those cuts later. So let's get ourselves to January, make further adjustments along the way when we have a better sense of all of the federal aid and the longer term outlook.
So I think we're all trying to just get to January for a lot of reasons. Roxanne, you're going to ask the next question.
Yeah, this one's for Paige, and I just wanted to say to Representative Martinez, we will get to you in the very next question. So Bill mentioned that we have $2 billion in reserves. So apparently we have a number of different types of reserve accounts, including the rainy day fund. So can you tell us what that is and how large it is and what it can be used for?
Sure. So yes, we do have a good deal of funding in the reserve accounts. The rainy day fund, more formally known as the Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund, is the largest of those 5 reserve funds that make up the general fund reserves. So I have another table, if you wouldn't mind pulling that up. So this table shows those reserve funds, those 5 reserve funds, and their amounts.
Oh, that's not it.
So as of the latest estimates we have, the reserves are expected to have about 1.9 billion in them, like Bill mentioned, or about 26% of those appropriations.
Wrong slide. I was trying to tell him that.
Okay.
Well, I'll get the right one up there in just a second. Sorry.
No worries.
It's with me.
Let's see. Okay. So as of the latest estimates we have, the reserves are expected to have about 1.9 billion in them, which is about 26% of appropriations at the end of this fiscal year. So this is actually a really healthy amount. In fact, a recent Center on Budget and Policy Priorities report that came out right before this pandemic started ranked New Mexico 4th in the nation when it comes to having adequate budget reserves. However, of course, nothing can quite prepare you for something like what we've seen as the result of this virus. So of these 5 different reserves, the largest is on the left, which we mentioned, the rainy day fund. That has about 1.3 billion in it. This can go a long way to shore up those anticipated revenue shortfalls that we expect. The other reserve funds also have some money, but many don't have as much flexibility as to what they can be used for, and they have different criteria for getting at those funds. So we think tapping this rainy day fund and the other reserves that we can is smart for a few reasons. Now is the time that our economy needs a quick infusion of resources to avoid debilitating cuts to services. Now we can also take this money from savings and put it directly into the pockets of New Mexico's workers and families who will spend it quickly and locally on goods and services. So creating this demand is one of the best things we can do for Main Street. And then finally, tapping into our reserves also gives New Mexico time to respond sensibly to whatever budget shortfalls may remain in this fiscal year and beyond while maintaining those needed services. Like Bill mentioned, there are just so many unknowns right now, and using our reserves will give our economy a little time to stabilize so we can make the best decisions possible for the well-being of our state and our people.
Okay, so we can stop sharing that. And now a question that Javier gets to weigh in on with Amber. Voices has long advocated for closing a significant number of tax loopholes for corporations and for the wealthiest of our taxpayers. And you'll remember the slide we showed that showed how regressive the tax system is. What loopholes and other sources of revenue do you see being in play, and how much of these could elicit funding to help address the crisis? And I'm guessing for the tax increases and loopholes, that's probably a January 2021 fight, not a special session fight. But let's start with Javier on this.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. First of all, I'd like to just make note that the work that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years, specifically, I'm speaking for the House of Representatives, we could not be in better shape to deal with this crisis than we are now. We've got, as Paige noted earlier, we've got a very healthy reserve through the tax stabilization fund and in the operating reserve as well. And to your question, last legislative session, we passed House Bill 6, which in its original form was over $300 million in new revenue by, number one, bringing progressivity back into the income tax code. Let's remember that 2003 legislative session, then Governor Richardson with the Democratic legislature cut personal income tax rates in half. That very same legislative session, they went in and raided the permanent fund, supposedly for educational reforms, but looking back, they simply supplanted funding that was lost through those tax cuts. So bringing progressivity back into that code, I think, is key. We succeeded in bringing some through HB 6. As it passed the House, it would have taken us back almost to the pre-Richardson years. After negotiating with the Senate, it was watered down to the very, very highest earners. I'm talking people earning $250,000, $300,000 a year. But regardless, we saw it as a big win to have been able to get a little bit of that income tax back into state coffers. I think the corporate tax also needs to be revisited. That's the one that I think Amber spoke about earlier, 2013, in the final sessions of the session. Some would argue after the end of the session in 2013, which is when it was voted on. These are tax cuts that are sold to us as a way to incentivize business growth, but we just haven't seen the data that says that. Before the pandemic hit. Beyond that, we obviously need to look at gross receipts tax reform, which I can tell you that's something that Republicans and Democrats agree on. The question is, do we reform the gross receipts tax code in order to raise revenue to fully fund government, or do we simply do it to lower the tax rate, to 2 or 3%, like some Republicans would want, in order to just have a flat sales tax? So I think gross receipts is probably where the biggest fight will be, and certainly it's not a fight that we will be taking on necessarily in 2021. But I think when it comes to personal income tax, corporate tax, it all has to be on the table. The last thing I'll say, we did something really good in HB 6 as well, which was to tax internet sales. For a long while, the Martinez administration, the previous governor, refused, I think on at least 2 occasions, to enact bills that we had passed with bipartisan support because of her pledge to not raise taxes. In HB 6, we did just that. And now, especially during this time when a lot of people are shopping online, the time couldn't be better to be collecting that tax, on these big corporations like Amazon.
Oh, Amber, did you want to amplify?
Yeah, I think Representative Martinez covered it, and I think we're all on the same page as Retake when we say that slashing budgets isn't going to get us anywhere. We saw what austerity did to us after the last recession. We don't want to go down that road again. So we have to make sure that money is in the hands of New Mexicans who will spend it quickly and locally. And so we need to keep up those programs that are most important for New Mexico families. And so I think the revenue question is a good one, because even now, when times are so difficult, even maybe now more than ever, we need to be having the revenue discussion. And so, as Bill said, we need to make sure we maximize federal relief. And while that is so uncertain right now, we should really be cautious during the special. We just need to do just what we need to do to get us through to 2021, utilize our reserve funds if necessary to plug in budget holes that the federal relief doesn't fill, and also be very careful about protecting existing revenue. Part of the reason we're in the situation that we're in is because we've given away too much of it over the years away. So we need to be careful about that. And then when we talk about revenue raisers during the 2021 during the session, because I think you're right, Paul, that those probably won't happen during the special, but during the 2021 session, we agree with Representative Martinez. We need to talk about our personal income taxes. We need to talk about getting some of that money back that we gave away in 2003. We need to talk about fully repealing the capital gains deduction and getting some of that revenue back. We think that all businesses in New Mexico, especially those ones that are big and multi-state, that those should be paying their fair share too. And one thing that I'd mentioned that came up during the 2020 session and that I think is also still relevant for consideration, especially during the pandemic, is we also support what's been called a healthcare provider fee. And that's a fee that would be put onto insurers, and it helps make up for some revenue that was recently repealed at the federal level. And that could be used to create a new healthcare affordability fund. So that would also be a relevant source of revenue, especially now. And while you're talking about revenue raisers, I'd also just say that we also, we always say it, but we think New Mexico's tax system should work for everybody. And so that including some benefits for New Mexicans who are having a really hard time right now, many of whom have been left out of federal relief, especially many of our immigrant families and immigrant workers, low-income families in New Mexico, families with children, that they also need tax relief. And HB 6, as Representative Martinez has mentioned, HB 6 showed that you can raise revenue and you can improve fairness at the same time, because that bill raised a significant amount of revenue. It helped diversify our revenue streams, and still, even with that revenue raising, 70% of New Mexico families with children will see a personal income tax cut from it. So I think that we should also, while the focus should be on revenue raising, that it's also important to continue to consider fairness in our tax system as well.
And the other thing we have to do is make sure that we don't give away more revenue. And I know in 2019, we had a bill that created a new top tier tax bracket. And in 2020, Senator Smith and Senator Clemente Sanchez introduced SB 274 to put a 5-year halt to that, or delay to that, and that would have cost us $230 million. So these are two fiscal conservatives who are constantly saying, we have to watch our budget and watch our finances, and yet they were ready to give away $230 million to the top 3% in the state. So there's some political stuff to get done too.
Yeah. So the next question is for both Javier and Bill. So what are the impediments to making some of these changes? Do we need to replace certain legislators, or can we do it with those fiscal conservatives in there? And what do we need to do to make this happen?
Well, I'm not, I'm not in the business of replacing legislators unless they're on the House side. And that's my role as co-chair of the House Campaign Committee. My job from the time I got elected was to take the House back. And then once we took it back, to make it more, so that it's more in touch with its people and its constituents. And so now we have a House of Representatives that I'm very proud of, a House of Representatives that is thoughtful, smart, intelligent, compassionate, hardworking. So I'll stick to my lane. And there's a lot of good people who can speak to your specific question. What I will say though is that number one, and I've been around the legislature for a good 15 years before I was in there as a legislator, as an advocate, and I can tell you that the momentum has never been stronger for a movement for tax reform that is equitable, fair, and just. I think that with regard to the public, we will need a lot of help from organizations like yours to build that groundswell. In many cases, the discussion, the taxes are boring, right? By nature, budget discussions are boring. It's not sexy stuff. It's not the hot button issues that that you send mailers on during an election necessarily, right? And so a lot of people, I think, are misinformed about the importance of tax reform. So helping us build that groundswell, I think, is key in helping us get this done. On Sunday, former Governor Richardson wrote an op-ed, and I was really happy for like 3 seconds reading into it, because he's talking about tapping the permanent fund for early childhood. And then like 2 sentences later, he says, do not raise taxes. And that's kind of I think that's the political problem we have as Democrats. We are afraid to talk about taxes, and we shouldn't be, right? In fact, what we need to do is we need to learn how to talk about taxes in the context of fully functioning, thriving schools for our children, a healthcare system where everybody has access to it that is state of the art, infrastructure that is state of the art, an early childhood system that is fully funded so that every single child in the state has the opportunity to succeed, right? You tell me all that, I will pay as many taxes as I need to make sure I have that, right? But I think until we find that fighting spirit as Democrats to ensure that we lead with truth and conviction when it comes to taxes, we're always going to end up kind of biting around the edges, right? And that to me is the biggest obstacle. But we've done it. House Bill 6 was a mammoth bill, and the folks at Voices were there with us throughout that whole fight, and we did it, right? And not only did we do it, but at the conclusion of that session, we got the Senate to agree to a tax increase on the wealthiest New Mexicans. So it's doable, right? That was one legislative session, totally doable.
Bill? You're muted, Bill.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, for leaving the Senate to me. So I think what Javier said is true about the House. They have done an amazing job of really not just making positive change and voting for it, but articulating why and talking about the need for revenue and talking about the budget and taxes as a moral document. They've faced head on the Javier Martinez lawsuit and said there has been institutional racism in our history and it needs to be corrected. And they've been very bold about that. And a lot of members of the Senate as well. So there are a lot of obstacles. One of them that we face is simply that conservatives do a really good job of simplifying the messages about, taxes are bad and nobody likes to pay taxes. And the fact is that, there's a couple of ways to get ourselves out of this. And one is to reverse the gains we've made in education, which is what the conservatives are proposing. Or you can reverse the failed tax cuts. And we as progressives have really failed to message that well, or in a way that's simple. I mean, you can tell just from this webinar how we all like to get in the weeds about stuff. And that's not the way the other side does it. The other side delivers a very simple message about a death tax, or they're gonna tax you into poverty. And it just sounds good, but it's not real. It's just not real. It doesn't work. It doesn't add up. You got folks on the other side who are pushing to sign a pledge, pushing candidates and lawmakers to sign a pledge to never raise taxes. That's nothing but a pledge to cut education, healthcare, and public safety. Because those three things are 91% of the budget. You can't face a $2 billion shortfall and not cut education, healthcare, and public safety. You got to raise some revenue somewhere along the line. So I think we're honest in addressing what we face. but we have a real challenge. So let me just say specifically that what I think most people on the call probably know, Senate corporations and Senate finance committees are really difficult. The tax bills go through those committees and they tend to be fiscally conservative. There's a reason that the Corporations Committee is called Corpse. It's where good bills go to die. And a lot of good tax legislation that comes over from the House gets watered down, changed in corporations or in Senate Finance. I will just say this, that the bill that you referred to earlier that would have given a $200 million tax break to the top 3% passed the Corporations Committee and the Senate Finance Committee unanimously. Nobody on either side of the aisle voted against those. So that's what we're up against. That was only a month before the pandemic hit that those two committees unanimously voted to give a $200 million tax break to the top 3%.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. Voices was being delicate, as was Representative Martinez, but if you want to find out some of why we find so many good bills go through the House and die in the Senate, you can go to retakeourdemocracy.org. On the right side of the page, we have a video by Eric Shimamoto on Fix the Senate, and it'll explain it very clearly. So we're on to the next question, and this is for Javier. The last option, of course, in terms of meeting our deficit or our revenue problems, as Bill would say, is to turn to the permanent fund. And I'm guessing it has taken a bit of a hit in the past 2 months from the market's decline, but how might this be used, and is that something that the governor and the legislature might consider?
Great question. So the permanent fund, between the time we started the legislative session and the end of March, saw a loss of about $2 billion. It went from $20 billion to $18 billion, which is ironic because had we been able to invest from the permanent fund for 10 years, which is how long we've been fighting to get a piece of the permanent fund for early childhood, that's the exact same amount of money we would have already invested in early childhood. So, we let Wall Street swallow it up in a matter of months when we could have been investing it in young children who we know are recession-proof. I think that option has to be on the table. And quite frankly, I don't even think it needs to be sort of a last resort. I think it needs to be one of the first options on the table. However, I would advise against tapping the permanent fund solely for the purposes of balancing the budget, because we are afraid of raising revenue through the tax code. And that's something that I've been very clear on. We saw that happen under Bill Richardson. As I said earlier, he cut income tax rates for the wealthiest New Mexicans in half, and then he raided the permanent fund to pay for that. That's a huge problem. And that for me will be a problem moving forward. That's why we're gonna introduce the constitutional amendment for early childhood once again. We're gonna be proposing to the legislature a 1% increase in the distribution in order to support and fully fund the early childhood system. Any attempts to use a permanent fund to simply backfill the budget, I think is foolish, and we need to be very careful of.
Okay, so we just have one question left. So in a few minutes, we're going to get to the participant questions. And that is, related to those participants, what can people do? The special session, is starting on June 18th. But maybe there's something we can start doing now. And this actually is for Amber, but maybe Javier, you have something to say about this too. But does New Mexico Voices for Children have any kind of toolkit to help people advocate? What are the resources available to us, and what can we do?
Sure, Roxanne. So I'd say first and foremost, check out our website. It's www.nmvoices.org. So post all of our materials there. We have fact sheets or policy briefs or reports on almost every issue that we've covered and many that have come up in the questions. So we have those there. I'd also point out we have tax and budget guides. We call them Citizens Guide to New Mexico's Tax System and our Citizens Guide to New Mexico State Budget. So I think we do the best work out there on kind of breaking down that information into a way that's really easy to access. And so I'd say check out our website for our tax and budget guides. Those are I think really great. You can sign up for email updates. I'd say follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You know, I think especially now when in-person communications are different and most people are home more than ever, that social media can play a really strong role in communicating with policymakers. Our social media accounts are where you will find all of our advocacy asks, all of our social media graphics, where we're kind of on the front line, most immediate part of the legislative session. And so the other thing that I'd say is just to reiterate something that anybody involved with Retake already knows, and that's that getting involved in the policy process and making your voice heard is really key to changing the system and creating the change that we want to see. So the halls of the Roundhouse are pretty narrow ones, and it can be a pretty closed off place, but the Roundhouse is supposed to be the people's house. So make it that. Contact your legislators, contact legislative leadership, contact the governor's office, let them know what's most important to you, because it shouldn't be just nonprofit policy groups like Voices. I think we're great, but it shouldn't just be groups like ours, and it certainly shouldn't be really big corporations and big corporate interests that have input in the policy process. And I'd also say that because dissenters, especially on social media, can too often drown out the voices of others. Also let lawmakers know not just what you're asking for and what you hope to see, but let them know when you think that they are doing a good job. We have a lot of policymakers in Santa Fe and a lot on this call here who are real legislative champions, who are policymaking champions for New Mexico's kids and families, who have fought for really incredible policy progress and who are kind of on the front lines of protecting families now and trying to make our tax system and our budget system better. So also let them know when they're doing a good job. You know, if you ever get on the governor's Twitter feed, God bless you if you ever scroll down to the comments for some of the COVID posts, but let policymakers know when they're doing great things as well, because there is a lot happening in Santa Fe that bodes well for New Mexico's kids and families right now.
Javier, did you want to add something? Oh,
yeah, I agree with Amber. I think, I see two people religiously at House Tax and Rev meetings in the front row, and that's usually Bill Jordan and Paul Gibson. So, that type of advocacy, that type of presence, because we are a citizen legislature, we don't have staff necessarily other than administrative staff during the session. And so we rely a lot on advocates, right? Whether it's lobbyists, registered paid lobbyists, or advocates for nonprofits, or citizens who show up, constituents who show up to inform us. And so that really helps, right? The Retake Your Democracy buttons, the fact sheets that you pass out when you stand in support or in opposition of something. It's really good information. Now, moving forward, for the special, we're not sure yet how it's going to operate, right? We're not sure if we're going to be able to do a virtual session. We're not sure what the process will be for public comment, in order for us to do it safely, obviously. And then come January, I don't know that there's going to be a vaccine that would have been fully deployed by then either, right? So come the regular session, which is a 60-day session, we might be in a very similar boat. Doubling down on these types of Zoom forums, on social media, anything that you all can do as private citizens to elevate these issues with your neighbors, with your family, very, very important. Obviously voting, right? The primary's coming here up in a week or so. And then the general election, also critical from county treasurer here in Bernalillo County all the way up to the presidency. So doubling down on all that stuff, right? And then, the last thing, I think, if you're not doing so already, I'm sure you are, but engaging young people. And, at every term, we get those young people involved. We can't let this pandemic, we cannot let this economic depression sideline those folks. We need them. We need them to vote, but most importantly, we need their voice, we need their ideas, and we need their energy.
Well, we're going to turn this over to our Q&A. If one of you from Voices wants to just give your website again, I can attest. I steal from that liberally. It is one of the best websites on policy in New Mexico. So maybe Amber, do you want to let people know?
Yeah, our website again is www.nmvoices.org, and you can find all of our publications there. And actually in the chat, I also dropped the direct link to our special session recommendations there as well, but you can find everything in there. And if you can't find it, you're always free to reach out to myself or to Bill or to Paige or any of our staff.
Okay, and Javier, for you, is there a way to reach you?
Yes, so my website is javiermartinez4newmexico.com, and my Twitter page, Javier4NM, is the best way to reach me. Cell phone is on my legislative website, which you can reach through the www.nmlegis.gov, I think is what it is.
Yes.
But my sub page is on there as well with my cell number.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
So we're going to get to the participant questions now. And I'm just to let you know, panelists, that if you click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your page, you can see those questions yourselves. Typically what we do is we just start thumbing through. We've got 18 questions there. I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but some of them that were asked early on have probably been answered already. So we'll go through, pick one, and then in the meantime, if you see something that you'd really like to have the opportunity to answer, just let us know. So anything, somebody's asking about the Transform Education Fund. Oh, Gail Evans, aren't there millions there as well in the Transform Education Fund? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Apparently not.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the amount would be, but there are definitely other funds that could be swept and have been swept in the past. I don't know, Bill, if you want to mention some that you've seen swept in the past, but the ones I mentioned were just the general fund reserves. There are many other funds that unfortunately can be swept, like the College Affordability Fund, which we saw swept in past downturns.
We have a question from Marjorie Lucky. She wanted to know if Paige had any data.
Amber.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amber had any data on whether there's research that shows the correlation between tax cuts and lost jobs instead of the vice versa.
And tax cuts and declining markers of well-being.
Yeah, so as you cut taxes, then education, social welfare, and so forth declines. Is there any study on that?
Yeah, so I mean, probably Paige or I could go down the rabbit hole of talking about economic research on tax cuts and how they correspond to an economy or society's well-being, but there's not evidence that shows that tax cuts lead to prosperity. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that shows that giving away revenue just means you don't have money to invest it in people. And so there's a negative correlation between tax cuts and indicators of well-being on a big scale. When we talk about it, we like to try to not get too weedy because people's eyes tend to glaze over, and we tend to talk about what happened during our years of austerity when we cut taxes, under the Martinez administration 61 times, when we fell to last to worst in child poverty, childhood food insecurity, and educational outcomes. And we lost an educational lawsuit. It's for underfunding, for severely underfunding our education system. That's because we were giving away all the money and we weren't willing to raise the money to replace it. And so it's just, it's very basic things. We cut those programs, they can't help kids and families are the ones that suffer. And so you could look at it on a big picture scale, and you can also look at it here in New Mexico, what we've seen over the past 10, 20 years.
Okay, here's a question from Joyce Bogosian. Hi, Joyce. What can our state do to advance investments in renewable energy initiatives in a revenue stream shortage environment like we're in now?
You know, I can take a stab at that question. Representative McQueen had a bill last year that would have imposed over the course of several years upwards of a 20 to 30 cent a gallon gas tax. And the revenue would have been divided in three ways. Roads and maintenance would be one. The other one would be a rebate for low-income earners to address the regressivity of the tax. And then the third fund would go to a green energy transportation fund. And this would have been one of those systemic changes, right, that would have taken grip and that could have really addressed three big issues that we have in the state: road maintenance, regressive tax code, and you know, the lack of a serious, I think, green energy future. The bill, you know, it was the first time the legislature had seen that bill, but I don't think it'll be the last. I think it was a very well thought out proposal. I should mention that it was proposed by a group of Santa Fe high school students. And, you know, again, talk about young people just taking the bull by the horns. That was one of the most impressive pieces of legislation I've seen in 6 years. I think it'll be back. Obviously, it's difficult in an economic depression to do that. But then again, oil prices, or gas prices, I should say, are very low. You know, I think here in my neighborhood yesterday, gas prices were about $1.30 a gallon, which is the lowest I've seen in a long, long time. So if there is a time to raise the gas tax, it's probably when it's really low. And if we're going to raise it, this is the kind of transformative change that we can make and really put our money where our mouth is with regard to green energy. Lastly, I will mention, you know, the Energy Transition Act, which I voted for. It was not my bill, but I voted for it because I do think that it sets us up for an aggressive green energy portfolio, one of the most aggressive ones in the country. And I think we just got to keep doing that. We got to keep doubling down on those types of innovative solutions to a very pressing problem.
Okay, here's a question from Justin Garrett, I think. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. I am co-chair of the New Mexico Public Health Association Policy Committee. How do organizations like us most effectively advocate in a short session? Is there a way for progressive organizations like us to show up with a unified voice to have a greater impact? Anyone?
I think that's a great question. And from the NMPHA, I would say we've had a great relationship with you all over the years during this legislative session. In fact, we had some of your members, we spoke at your policy committee in the fall, or your policy conference in the fall, and then I had members reach out to me during the legislative session to see how they could advocate. And so particularly on the census, what we kind of did with people who reached out to me, I gave them talking points, which committees were important to talk to, which legislators. Luckily, they had people from all over the state who were willing to make some in-office visits in the Roundhouse during the session. And so they were able to visit with the chair of House Appropriations, Representative Patty Lundstrom. You know, they were able to visit with other key legislators on both House and Senate side. And so I think, particularly if you're a member of a grassroots organization or your community group or just your own voice contacting your legislators, I think is really key. You know, they hear from us all the time, but to have people in their district reach out about important issues and to be echoing the messages that we have come to. So I posted our policy recommendations for the special, and I'll also say that we came to those with a group of close partners. We convened what's called the New Mexico Fairness Project. It's a tax and budget coalition for nonprofit organizations in the state. And so there's a lot of input provided. It's definitely not just voices. We lead the coalition, but there's incredible partners around the table that inform those policy recommendations. And so those policy recommendations are in line with what a lot of our progressive partners are pushing for. And we share messaging on all those issues as well. And so I'd recommend, if you're an organization, to reach out to us about getting involved with the Fairness Project. And MPHA, it'd be great to have you. And if not, that there's a way to be part of that echo chamber. So that voice is coming from all sorts of different actors, all over the state, going to many different legislators as a unified voice, as you said, Justin.
Okay. This is from Stephen Conrad. Hi, Stephen. I grew up in middle-class community, and this community, upper middle-class community, and this community was perfectly willing to tax itself heavily to finance exceptional public schools. How do we make similar argument toward raising revenue as an investment in our children, ourselves, and our community? Maybe that's Bill.
Yeah.
It's interesting that when we vote on schools, bond issues, and property taxes for schools or for hospitals and healthcare, that in general, they overwhelmingly pass. The people are willing to, when they get a chance to vote, they are very willing to raise additional money, to pay a little bit more when they know what the money's going for. And somehow there's a disconnect between their willingness to raise their own taxes and their vote for a lawmaker who then thinks that their constituents don't want that. And that's a tough one. And I think we just simply need to do perhaps a better job of making sure that the public knows where the money is going. I would be willing to bet that if you asked most of the people in New Mexico that about New Mexico's state budget, and you said how much of that budget goes to education, very few would say that it is about 70% or 60%, because they just don't think that much goes to education. I don't know where they think it goes. I think, the other side, the conservatives, will tell you it's waste, fraud, abuse, unnecessary raises. But if the citizens knew a little more about where the money went and the importance of that, I think they would support additional revenue.
I forgot what I was going to say. We'll move on to the next question.
Thanks, Bill. Okay. Have any of you looked at the questions and see one that you're dying to answer, or should we just keep going through and selecting them for you?
I could speak to the healthcare provider tax just briefly.
Okay. Yeah, that was Marjorie Lucky again asked to explain the healthcare provider tax. Okay.
It's actually a health insurance premium tax. So there was a tax on providers in the past. That's not what this is. This is on health insurance companies themselves. And that tax is about 3% right now at the federal level. And because the feds are trying every way possible to destroy the Affordable Care Act, they're trying to defund it. And so they took away that tax as a way of defunding the Affordable Care Act. So New Mexico could pick up that same tax, and it wouldn't be a tax increase on the insurance companies. It would simply be that it would be collected by New Mexico instead of collected by the federal government. And if we did that, even at a slightly lower rate than what the feds did, which would amount to a small tax cut, we could bring in about $125 million a year. And that's pretty significant. And the initial proposal was to use that money to make healthcare more affordable for those who are low and moderate income. So I don't know what the proposal will look like now that we need money for basic healthcare, but that was the proposal. So it's important to know that it is on insurance companies, not on the providers themselves. And by the way, insurance companies are making record profits right now because nobody's able to do routine or elective surgeries and even go to the doctor. I mean, everybody's putting off healthcare. So insurance companies are making record profits right now, and they could certainly afford to pitch in at the same level of tax that they're currently paying.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you. So here's one from Rebecca Puckstare, who is actually running for a Senate seat in Albuquerque.
Right.
What are your views on a state bank? And if you think it's a good idea, when is the best time to get a state bank going? And I know there's an effort in the legislature to at least examine, study a state public bank. Anybody have thoughts about that?
I think if you look at the example in North Dakota, I think it's something that we do need to look seriously at, and it's something that I would support if it came down to a vote. I don't know. I know the city of Santa Fe did a feasibility study some time ago, and I'm not sure where that went. But I think it's something we should at least study and look at. My understanding is that it makes, borrowing from by the state a lot less expensive, and it moves money a little bit quicker than perhaps a traditional financial institution. So I think it's worth looking into.
We got another question here from Carol Sassaman. What is the chance of passing recreational marijuana as a consideration of revenue source?
Probably not something that we will address in the special session. The special session will really focus on fiscal year 20 and solvency. And even the 21 budget won't be really addressed until we meet again in January. Having said that, when we meet again in January, I think that recreational cannabis needs to be on the top of the list. It's an industry that can generate anywhere between $50 and $100 million a year in revenues. The bill that I sponsored the last 2 sessions is one of the most progressive, well thought out, vetted pieces of legislation probably in the country. It addresses the inequities that resulted from the failed war on drugs on communities of color. It has a tax rate that is workable both for the revenue piece, but also for those that are going to be engaging in that industry as business people. And it also, has very strong protections for the medical cannabis program, which, for many of us, that's our top priority in terms of recreational, protecting that particular part of the economy. So my expectation is that you will see a bill and that you will see a great deal of debate. And this has been the case since I first sponsored this bill when I got it through the House in the 2019 session. I will debate the merits of that bill with anybody, and we will win that debate every single time. It's well past time that we do this, not just for the revenue reasons, but for public health and just common sense reasons.
Great. So Paul Stokes asks, is a carbon tax a possible addition to our toolbox? Hey, Paul.
Hi, Laura.
Anybody on carbon tax possibility?
I'll let the tax experts answer that one.
No comment? Well, I think there's a carbon tax Zoominar tomorrow night, so maybe we'll send you a link.
Who's doing that?
The Post Carbon Institute, I believe,
Oh.
and we'll send you a link.
Were you about to say something, Paige?
I know a few of our representatives, I think, are doing a climate policy specific webinar in a couple days. Bill, you had forwarded that link. And as far as our carbon tax goes, yeah, it's not something that Voices has worked on specifically, but it's something that we've thought about and kind of want to get more into, or at least more knowledgeable about it.
Okay. And here's one from Holly Beaumont here in Santa Fe. Hi, Holly. Is generating state revenue an obligation of the legislature?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
She's asking if the legislature is obligated to generate state revenue. Is that part of their charge to generate revenue for the state?
I think that is probably our most important job, to raise revenue in order to pay for critical government services that will help us build the society that we all want to live in. So absolutely, that's why I said earlier, right? Like budget and tax is not the sexiest political discussion necessarily, but in my opinion, it's probably the most important.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we had a question here from Kip Bobroff, and that was, what do you think the prospects are to expand the New Mexico working family tax credit in, probably not in the special session, but in the regular session? This is for Bill or Javier.
Or anybody who wants to take a stab. Wait, you're muted, Javier.
I'm sorry. I said I'm going to take a stab at it, but I'm going to pass it over to Amber because she's my partner in crime on this thing. So in 2019, in HB6, we increased the working family tax credit from 10 to 17%, and in part paid for it by reducing the amount of the capital gains deduction. In 2020, we passed a bill out of the House that would have increased that tax credit from 17 to 20%, and then also expanded the credit so that undocumented workers who file taxes using an ITIN with children could qualify for the credit, as well as childless workers. These are young people who, many of them aging out of the foster system who may not have, a parent who claims them on their taxes, so that they would be able to essentially claim themselves. That bill passed the House and ended up dying in the Senate. I think the prospects in the January 21 session are good. I think they're probably very good. As we rebuild the economy, as we look for ways to increase tax revenues by bringing progressivity into the tax code, we've got to remember that we've got to find ways to give relief, especially to working families, and especially to those working families who are, essential workers right now, the folks that are holding society together. We've got to make sure that we take care of them. And the working families tax credit, and Amber can speak more to this, is one of the best tax programs in the nation. It's based out of the earned income tax credit at the federal level that many of us thought Ronald Reagan started, but then I was corrected by somebody, and I guess maybe it was Gerald Ford, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think Chairman Martinez covered it. We've made some great progress, incredible progress over the past couple of years, and this legislative session, that the bill to expand New Mexico's working families tax credit for low-income workers in New Mexico, it passed multiple House committees, it passed the full House, and it died in the Senate Finance Committee. So where where's that impediment to progress on the policy? It goes back to where's the impediment for progress on a lot of these policies, especially in good tax policy. So that's where it died. Hopefully, as Chairman Martinez said, hopefully we have an even better shot this year. It's one of the best policies that New Mexico has, benefits kids, families, workers, our economy. There's nothing that can be said bad about it. More than ever, we need to pass it, and we need to expand it to those New Mexico workers and their families who are left out of so much federal relief. Those families are still hurting. Those workers are still hurting. And come the 2021 session, we really hope that we'll see some progress on it. And I'd say for anybody who wants to get involved in it, talking to your legislators, and especially on the Senate side, talking to folks there. If Senator Ortiz-Pino is on or still on, he was also a sponsor of a Senate bill that did the same thing. And so we have some real champions in the Senate, but they're not in Senate Finance Committee. And so any work to push it through there, I think, would be beneficial. But we're hoping that now more than ever it's needed, and so that it has a good chance.
Great, thank you. I just want to point out, going back to one of the previous questions, that on the chat, you can see from Paige Knight that she mentions that New Mexico House Dems are doing a spring salon series, and she gives you the website to register. And May 28th, so that's just this Thursday, there's one on climate and environmental policy. So you can check that out before you leave. And we just have a minute or so left. So I think, why don't we just, whoever wants to, each of you make a comment, a very brief comment, just to wrap up, closing comment, and then we'll be done.
How about you, Paige?
Yeah, well, thank you again for having us. It's fun to talk tax and budget policy with all of you. If you have any questions on the budget or tax at all, feel free to reach out to me at pknight@nmvoices.org. So thank you.
Okay. Bill.
Thanks again. Thanks again for having us. We really appreciate it. I'll just say that, if there's one thing we've learned from the education lawsuit and now from the pandemic, it's that equity matters and that we're not there. We've been sued and we've seen the health impacts of a system that has tremendous inequities. So none of this is about going back to normal, because normal is not okay. And hopefully this is the start of something new and something that is transformative for our state. And I'm excited that we're all hoping to be a part of that. So thanks.
Okay, Amber?
Just thanks to you all. Thanks for everybody who was on the call. And to echo what Bill said, the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting recession, it's a tragedy. It's has created challenges like we never thought we would see, and like our state has never faced. But in times of great crisis are those times where we can really push for change that benefits New Mexico's kids, our families, our people of color, all of those people whose voices have been too absent in the policy making process, the people who often don't have seats at the table. Now is the time to put the needs of those New Mexicans first, to prioritize them in policy. And that's what everybody, on this call, I think we're all after that same goal. And so we appreciate the legislators that are on this call that fight for New Mexicans like that. We appreciate Paul and Roxanne, all that you are all doing to unite New Mexicans and try to open up what is really a closed process to more people. And so just, again, thanks, appreciation, and there's progress. We can do it, so now's the time.
Oh, Javier.
Yeah, thank you all for having us. As the other panelists eloquently stated, this is an equity issue, and on the House Democratic Caucus side, from our perspective, we're excited because we're gonna keep working as hard as we've worked over the last 3 years. Our candidates are excellent, both the ones that are incumbents, but also the ones that are running in contested seats. Jessica Velasquez out in the East Mountains is a phenomenal candidate, for example. And anything that you could do to support them by making phone calls for them, by sending them a contribution, by reposting a Facebook post, every single one of those things helps. We need more people like Jessica, like Melanie, like Day Hockman, too many to mention, but I'm just so proud of the way the House has worked over the last 3 years. And I want to double down on that effort so that come January, come the 2021 session, the House is as strong as ever as we begin this very difficult work of rebuilding our state's economy.
I want to reiterate what Representative Martinez said, and that is that we've got like a week, 1 week. And if you go to retakeourdemocracy.org and hover over the elections pages in our home banner, you'll have contact information for all of the 7 Senate challengers we've endorsed. You'll find a bunch of recommended candidates like Puck Stare, and we'll have, and it's just like you've got a little bit of time, you're home, maybe you have some cash. These candidates need your support right now. The truth of the matter is that many of these primaries are won by 50, 60, 70 votes. And even in the general, Abbas Akil, who we canvassed for extensively, won by 60 votes. And so that's all we have time for today.
Yep. Sorry we ran a few minutes over, everybody, but thank you so much to all of our panelists, Amber, Bill, Paige. Looks like we might have lost Javier. And thank you to all our attendees. We really appreciate your participation.
Thank you. There's more coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay active.
Thank you.
Thank you.